Roderick Pleasant is the first Duck to leave the program in spring football, and I don't know if he'll be the last at his own position group.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. A look at the tight end room and how it's all going to work. Oregon now leads for a five-star offensive tackle that isn't named Jackson Cantwell, all on today's show, which is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So, you knew it was going to happen eventually. Winter is coming. I get the sense, though, it might be more like winter in Arizona than winter in Siberia for Oregon in the transfer portal. But Roderick Pleasant is the first to depart. The reason I say, as defensive back, he might not be the first, or he might not be the last, rather, to leave from his own position group, is there's so many guys in that room. And it's one of the positions I've talked about a lot this spring on the show because I'm so beyond fascinated to see how this all plays out. You've lost your top 6 defensive backs from a year ago, and I only think there's one guy who I'm 100% certain is locked into a starting spot. That's Dylan Thieneman, the Purdue transfer at safety. Every other spot is up for grabs. So going into the spring game next week, which is essentially the end of a spring football for the Ducks, I think you're going to see a couple of other players enter the portal. Might be today, might be tomorrow, might be next week. The timing of these things can vary and depend on a lot of different factors, when a school is ready to add you and how quickly you can get the paperwork submitted and all that sort of stuff. And friendly reminder that Xavier Lucas reminded us from Wisconsin down to Miami that, pretty sure that was the guy's name, that the transfer portal just doesn't have to exist. You can always just unenroll from a school, re-enroll in another one, and then join the football team. That's an option that can happen. Going into the portal is easier, of course. But a lot of names in that defensive back room, and I think that a guy of Pleasant's caliber, having gotten to the point where he wants to transfer out or the staff wants to transfer out, I don't know which way that was really indicated from. I think it's a good sign about what that secondary has loading up for the next couple of years. And I think expectations for that unit are pretty high. Oregon just brought in their best defensive back recruiting class in the history of Oregon football. I don't even know what second place is. It's probably 2024, to be quite honest. But 2025 is a uniquely great haul with Dorian Brew and Trey McNutt and Naeem Offer. Like, they just brought in such an elite haul of talent. Chris Hampton, the DB's coach, was named the 24/7 Sports Recruiter of the Year for his efforts, deservedly so. So I think there's a lot of hype and excitement there. But Pleasant was not some guy who was buried deep down in recruiting charts when he committed to Oregon a couple of cycles ago. It was primarily between him between Oregon and USC when he was committing. He picked the Ducks, and this is a guy who you've probably seen his track photo pop up around on Twitter in the last couple of years, because that was kind of his most identifiable trait. He was literally one of the fastest players in the entire class of 2023. His only real impact for the Ducks: forced a fumble. The game was already over, but forced a fumble against Liberty, made a stop on a 2-point play against USC. Those were both a couple of seasons ago. So for this, that, and the other reason, I think when a guy who was a pretty highly rated 4-star recruit, who has elite speed, doesn't have elite size, he's kind of that 5'10-ish sort of range, 5'10", 5'11". If somebody like that is saying, I'm not going to, or the staff is saying, he's not going to be a big player, he's not going to get snaps and see the field, everybody else might be coming along. And so I think for Oregon secondary, they're in a really, really good spot because of the depth that they've accumulated. And it's just a matter of who are going to be the next 5 defensive backs that are big contributors after Dylan Thieneman. Don't really know. The coaching staff might have an idea. They might not have an idea. We'll get a better idea as we get closer to the spring game, or when the spring game comes around, and we can see, all right, who's kind of popping here. Because you might have names at the top of your mind like Ife Obadegwu, who's getting articles written about him and highlights are flying around. I've heard some buzz about what he brings to the table. They really like him at corner in his second season. Well, He was one of those guys in the 24 class who was a pretty highly rated dude, and if he winds up as a starting outside corner, I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe, though, he's only ready for the Dante Manning role, which is you're the number 3 corner, and you can play inside, you can play outside a little bit, but you're playing a significant role in the secondary, which is what Dante Manning really has done for the Ducks in the last 3 years. Like, you wouldn't have listed him when everyone's healthy as one of the guys at the top of the depth chart on the 2 deep, but you list him on the 2 deep and you would watch an entire game and go, oh, Dante Manning was pretty important to the secondary there. But I do wonder if there will be other names, because this is such a deep room and there are so many options all over the place. And I haven't heard or read anything regarding who it could be. The reason I said that to begin today's show is that the secondary just has enough names to where if somebody else were to transfer out, I'd say, yeah, it wouldn't surprise. The depth there, though, wouldn't concern me. It would just be the way it would come off the same way that this one comes off to me. He might be a good player, but he's not as good as somebody else because there's so much talent in the room, which is why you want to see Oregon continue recruiting at the level it has been over the last couple cycles, even with the transfer portal there. You want this sort of competition. You want to figure out who can rise to the top. Not every highly rated recruit works out, so you want to give yourself the most number of opportunities to throw darts at the board and figure out when you're going to hit a triple 20 or a bullseye, depending on what you need, barbecue sauce. So I like where Oregon's secondary is at. I don't, look at the loss of Roderick Pleasant and think, oh man, I was hoping to see him here. I thought he could have maybe been one of the guys at nickel. I think there are going to be a lot of options there. John Kennedy, who they brought over from Ole Miss in the portal, maybe this is a casualty of that. Maybe. I don't have the highest hopes or expectations for Kennedy. I think he's more of a depth piece. We'll see what happens with the Dalen Austin situation. Or maybe Naeem Offord is someone who is going to come in and play nickel right away, because he could play just about anywhere in the secondary as a true freshman. And my everydayers out there know from listening to Brian Smith talk about him, he might be the most freakishly ready true freshman defensive back Oregon has ever had. So I think there are a lot of options at really every spot, even without Pleasant there. I think you could see, I'm talking the whole secondary, not specifically the nickel spot or specifically outside corner positions. I think you could see 2 more transfers from the defensive back room. The other position I'd keep my eye on is the guys they're going up against in practice. Wide receiver just has so many guys. I mean, so many guys that can't all play. I don't know what everybody's expectations are because I haven't talked to every single player, of course, that's in that wide receiver room. But, I mean, a guy, I don't like throwing this out there because I don't want it to happen, but a guy like Kyler Casper may or may not be able to have a role, or Jurion Dickey could fall into that camp as well. Or maybe someone else has been recruited in the last couple cycles, a Dylan Gresham or a Jack Ressler, somebody like that who, I see the promise and potential. I just look at the depth chart and go, I don't know where you're flying up or whose spot you're taking or how you're seriously working into the rotation. I think for freshmen, whether that's a redshirt or a true freshman, the only guy I have an expectation of playing is DeCorian Moore. Only guy. And I don't see how he doesn't have some sort of role in the Oregon offense this year. But one portal departure is down, and Oregon still maintains what Dan Lanning routinely talks about in interviews, rightfully so, because it's a pretty impressive feat to still be able to hold on to at this point. Oregon still hasn't lost a starter to the transfer portal. Doesn't mean players haven't gone on to succeed other places. They have, but that's a non-zero thing. Major programs, Alabama lost Caleb Downs. Georgia lost its quarterback. Oregon hasn't lost a starter yet. I don't think that's nothing. I think Dan Lanning is right to point that out. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hit me up on Twitter. All of that good stuff. Speaking of pass catchers, there are receivers, and then there are the tight ends, which are such a fun group of guys. How do they look going into the spring game? How does it even work? Speaking of work, this episode brought to you by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more, experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. Finding the right talent is what you want for your business, of course. If you need help with a marketing campaign, for instance, Upwork can help connect you with a freelance expert who delivers incredible results. Instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps find affordable, top-tier freelancers to scale your business efficiently. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com. Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. Check them out at Upwork.com. I feel like I've been depriving some of you lately of second segment sips. It's on me. It's on me. They've always been there. You just haven't always seen them. Why? I don't know. It depends on what kind of mood I'm in. Yeah, that's who you're dealing with here. Okay. Let's talk about the tight end room because I love this position group going into the spring game next week because I know sort of one thing and really one thing only about this position group for Oregon on offense. And I don't expect there to be a massive difference in how the tight ends have been used because of the personnel that are here compared to the last 2 years with Will Stein as offensive coordinator. But let's start with who is just in the room. You've got Kenyon Sadiq. That's tight end 1. There are going to be no questions. There is not a position group battle. There could be a battle for tight end 2, which is a position of non-zero importance for the Ducks, who run, I think, as much 12 or 13 personnel, frankly, or 14 personnel they've run before, but 13 personnel is usually as heavy as they go. They have as many of those packages with multiple tight ends as anybody in the country. And in the last couple of years, they've had the guys to do it. Do they again this year? I think so. It's not quite as proven. Last year, you had Terrence Ferguson, a fourth-year starter, Patrick Herbert, who was a class of 20 recruit, 2020, 2019, that sort of range. And then you had Kenyon Sadiq, who was in his second year, and we saw him pop off in the Big Ten championship game with 2 touchdowns. So I think that him sliding into that tight end 1 role is, again, a traditional career progression for all you people out there who think, well, it's just portal now. It's not like it used to be. There are several examples on this Oregon team, last year's Oregon team, not as many as there used to be, of course, because you do have transfer guys in there. But Sadiq is a very traditional recruiting timeline player. He's pretty highly rated 4-star recruit. He plays a little bit as a true freshman. He plays more as a sophomore, pops at the end of the year. Now he's the lead guy in the room. So you've got him. You've got Jamari Johnson, who's a third-year tight end coming over from Louisville. You've got A.J. Pugliano, Roger Saliapaga, and Vander Plug. Those are all Oregon tight end high school recruits from the last couple of cycles. Vander Plug is the only true freshman in there. So Sadiq being expected to start might be one of the least questionable position group matters to discuss in spring football. I think this is as set in stone. I think this is arguably more set in stone than Dante Moore starting. That's how surefire of a deal that Kenyon Sadiq is there. And I feel really confident Dante Moore will wind up being Oregon's starting quarterback. I would place a higher degree of confidence that Kenyon Sadiq is tight end 1. So I don't think there are any questions, debates, concerns, or whatnot. It's either Will Stein or Drew Maringer said recently that, he's up to 250 pounds. So that is only going to increase his blocking capabilities, and he's still topping out at 22.5 miles an hour. He just doesn't move like everybody else. He really doesn't. There's never been a tight end like him. Last time I brought him up on the show, someone reached out and said, hey, what about Colt Lyerla? Well, Lyerla, really unfortunate end to his career, but Lyerla was a freak of nature, no doubt. He wasn't hurdling guys on the perimeter and able to basically line up like a wide receiver. He was just a freakish tight end who was also a really good blocker. Sadiq, I think, was a really good blocker last year. If you watch a lot of the plays where he was in there, he could move guys around. He put Abdul Carter on his backside one time. Like, dude's got the blocking chops. I'm not worried about that. I wonder statistically what he puts up compared to what Terrence Ferguson did the last couple of years. in this offense. I think Sadiq has more potential because he can give you even more yards after the catch. But I just am really, really excited to watch him in not just the spring game, but especially the season, and just see him kind of embrace that role. The other names to watch that I mentioned, let's start with Jamari Johnson. So he is a third-year player, and he is, not someone that played a bunch while at Louisville, redshirted his first year, and then last season played a little bit, 174 snaps. Didn't actually have great blocking grades, according to Pro Football Focus, but when you're not playing a major role, how much work can you really get in there? But this is why I say this position group is so clear at the top, more than arguably any other spot on the roster, because Sadiq is easily the most proven guy who also happens to have the most upside in there. So I think Jamari Johnson is probably someone they brought in to be tight end number 2. My confidence interval 1 to 10 is like a 4.5 that he's locked into tight end 2. I think it could be Roger Saliapaga. So this group going into the spring game next week, hopefully all those guys are going to see the field in some capacity. I don't know about Saliapaga. He's coming off of an injury last year. I'm not sure if he's expected to be ready for the spring game and such, which would then turn my attention to AJ Pugliano, who also came in the last class, and then Vander Plug. And Plug is the only true freshman that Oregon brought in this cycle. And, number 13 tight end in the country, top 24/7 player, according to 24/7 Sports, 6'6", 223 pounds. So a little bit lighter than, where Sadiq is right now or where Ferguson's been the last couple of years. But definitely an intriguing prospect, was a 4-star coming out of high school, someone who Oregon flipped from Washington once upon a time. I think the depth is questionable here. Like this is a spot, the secondary, the receiver room, maybe even the O-line or like the interior of the defensive line. If someone gets dinged up or if you have an injury along the depth chart somewhere, or especially at the top, there are spots where I think this Oregon roster can survive that. I don't know that tight end is one of them. Like the importance of Kenyon Sadiq staying on the field start to finish this fall, I think is pretty paramount, because you would not just be without a weapon. You might a significant weapon that Oregon, found a way to use in a great capacity, I thought, a season ago. I think Will Stein will continue to build on that with Sadiq getting involved with screens, pop passes, fly sweeps, downfield shots, whatever. He just does everything. He's a heck of a football player. But if he were to go down, I would suddenly look at tight end and say, I don't know what you're getting. I haven't seen Jamari Johnson be relied upon to be tight end 1. I haven't seen any sort of action required from AJ Pugliano, or obviously Vander Plug, a true freshman, or even Roger Saliapaga for that matter. So potential, talent, sure, solid. Overall, going into the spring game next week, I give this room a C+, just because now, again, I'm a pretty harsh grader, where C is average. I say slightly above average with a C+ here because of Sadiq's upside, but the depth, I feel okay. I feel okay about it right now. And Ducks or Tie-Dye sent in this question about the tight end room, saying, would love an opinion on Jamari Johnson's performance thus far and thoughts on Sadiq and Jamari pairing up on the field. I think those will be the top 2 guys. No one knows how they've performed or if they've performed so far, because we haven't seen anything. We'll have to wait for the spring game to get more of an answer on that. But I think for these 2, and again, it could be those 2. It could not be those 2. This is a position group that saw some depth chart fluctuation a year ago. Like, I was correct with my take last season that by the end of the year, I felt, hey, I think Sadiq's going to be past Herbert on the depth chart by the time the end of the year rolls around. I was correct about that. You could see some movement here. Jamari Johnson could start being the number 2 tight end, but if Saliapaga comes back and, in the limited action we saw from him last year, thought he looked pretty darn good, maybe he's someone that can fly up going into his second season. So plenty of questions here. Overall, I gave the room a C+, but that's solely based on Kenyon Sadiq. I think this could be, we'll see what do they look like in the spring game, a below average group if Kenyon Sadiq were to get hurt. Hopefully, though, that doesn't happen and everybody can grow a little bit as Sadiq thrives as tight end 1. If you ask me right now, who's tight end 1 in 2026, I have no clue. I have absolutely no clue. I don't know how many great offensive tackles Oregon's going to add, but it's going to be at least 2 since they've already got 1. First, this episode brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. And if you like college football, which you probably do if you're listening to this show, because that's all I'm talking about today, then you can bet all of that sort of stuff. You've got individual games. You've got win totals. Oregon's is 10.5. Again, that's as high as anybody in the country. You can bet national title odds, conference championship odds, Heisman odds, and more. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com. Claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Check them out at FanDuel.com. So, little recruiting nugget that I saw the other day. Adam Gorney of Rivals says that Oregon is now the leader for Emmanuel Iheanacho. This is a name that has kind of faded off my radar in the last couple of weeks because it really seemed like he was trending elsewhere. I don't know that it's even quite as promising as Jackson Cantwell, but if Gorney is correct and Oregon is seen right now as the leader, I'd have a hard time seeing how they miss on a verbal commitment from either Jackson Cantwell or Emmanuel Iheanacho. This is a very strong offensive tackle class recruiting-wise in 2026, and Oregon already has one of those elite prospects in Cody Green. And I know there have been tweets that have gone around. I think it was from Iheanacho or Cantwell. Like someone was suggesting, just for the fun of it, like, oh, what if Oregon got all three? I don't know how they would get all three, how they would keep or play all three unless one of them moved to guard. I suppose because you only put 2 tackles on the field at the same time, aside from the jumbo package, of course, where you need an extra, generally a tackle. You know, Josh Connerly, Janoris Wilson been the guys the last couple of years. I think Kavika Rogers maybe, or Feope Lalaulu, again, tackle primarily. So I think that package is why I always want Oregon to keep getting tackles, because that package has been really, really good for the Ducks. Like I don't have a number. I don't know if anybody does on the efficiency of that 14 jumbo package, no receivers, 3 tight ends, and extra offensive linemen. I'd say it's probably well over 80% for Oregon converting in whatever situation they're looking to do there. So they've been really good with that over the last several years. But anyway, bringing it back to these two guys, if Oregon were to land Cantwell and Iheanacho, I would be floored. I would also be kind of hesitant to say, are they going to be able to keep both these guys committed throughout the entire summer? Maybe, but man, I don't know. I would be surprised at the other end of the spectrum and a little disappointed, frankly, if Oregon isn't able to get a verbal commit from one of these guys. And remember, Cantwell is still, just sending up the strongest green and yellow smoke possible, where he's saying, I got all the information I need. I'm good. I'm going to Oregon spring game on Saturday, April 26th, and committing 4 days later. Like, that's just that would be the ultimate recruiting tease for Oregon fans if he winds up going elsewhere, at least in the short term, perhaps. But I think Oregon's going to get one of those two guys. Just based on the amount of time they've put into recruiting them and the way that Oregon has recruited in the last couple of cycles, I do believe they're capable of having 2 of these 3 tackles, because Cody Green is also, I don't know if fending off is the right term, but he's still being recruited by USC in Texas, and he does have visits lined up for the summer. He's got one to Oregon too. So I think between the 3 tackles, Oregon will certainly have at least one. I'd expect 2. I'd hope for 3. I don't describe 3 as a need. I don't think you need to go. If you can get them all, great. Go for it. Just full send. But do I expect that? No. Not necessarily. We'll wrap up today's show with a question from JT. After watching a bit about recruiting in yesterday's show, this was a previous show, not yesterday's show specifically. You get what I'm saying. You touched on the loose paraphrase, the negatives of Oregon that other teams use against us to try and steal and sway players to the dark side. Nice. The question, what are they? So, when you talk to people who cover recruiting, typically everything that comes out is positive. But I think that you don't hear as much because it's just kind of not in good taste, or it's not as optimistic. It's just not the sort of coverage people tend to go for. Like, I've mentioned Georgia's off-field issues before with regards to Jared Curtis. I think the reason you don't hear more about that is twofold. Number one, what I just mentioned, but number two, I don't think it's as big a part of recruiting as you think. It certainly can be. If you look at an entire recruiting class, though, Oregon is not a school that has to go out and say, you don't want to go there. You don't want to go to USC. You don't want to go to Miami. You don't want to go to Ohio State, because they have the ability, and I think it's a much stronger and more common pitch to make, to go out and say, hey, this is why you want to come to Oregon. This is why you want to come here. I think the two biggest one, really just one biggest one with Oregon and any sort of negative recruiting that other schools might use, it's the geography. It's all the way up in the Pacific Northwest, and you're from insert state in the middle of the country. If you ever even been up there before, not going to be easy for your family to go out to games. And hey, it rains a lot up there. Fact check, true. But now that I live in a place where it's sunny a lot, I do like that better. I do miss the rain every now and then, just for a nostalgic purpose. But on a practical level, no, I don't miss the rain. So I don't know how big of a factor those two things really are. I think geography is the bigger one. You know, if you're talking about a kid from Florida, but, you know, Dallas Wilson didn't flip and he popped off in Florida spring game, by the way. He went like 10 catches, 190 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He didn't flip from Oregon to Florida because Florida told him Oregon is so far away. Like, there were that might not have been the best example, just because there were familial concerns there for him. But like a kid who, you know, was from, like, let's say Lincoln Cure, 5-star tight end who committed to Kansas State. Let's say, you know, I mean, Oregon was recruiting him pretty heavily. I don't think a big part of the reason he chose Kansas State was Kansas State going to him and saying, Oregon's just so far away. Like, he might feel that. He might know that, obviously, if he knows where Oregon is, which not as many people do as you'd think, just as a general rule. I once went to when I first got to college, someone, this is a true story, legitimately asked me in like an icebreaker getting to know you session, whether or not in Oregon they still use covered wagons as like a primary mode of transportation. That's a legitimate thing that I got asked. I'll never forget it. But yeah, I think that's the biggest factor is, like, for whatever level it comes down, it comes into a recruitment. That'd be the one, is like, it's really far away, harder for your family to get there. You're far away from home, and we are closer even if we're 2 states away. But overall, positive recruiting, way more impactful than negative recruiting. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.